Okay, good evening to all of you and welcome to our Modern Minds on Jewish Matters series. Thank you so much for being here. I want to make another announcement that we have volunteers who are here encouraging people, facilitating all of our members to register and vote for the upcoming World Zionist Congress. There's a tremendous amount at stake, and which institutions are supported, and which programs are funded, and how leadership positions are filled is decided and determined by the delegates, and who the delegates are at the World Zionist Congress depends upon the amount of votes that there are. So there's many different slates. We sent out emails about this. I spoke about this on Shabbat, and my wife and I and other leaders of Bet Jacob are actually delegates or candidates with the Orthodox Israel Coalition, which is slate number 4. Our guest tonight, Stephen Flatow, is also an ambassador candidate on that slate number 4, Orthodox Israel Coalition. And these are our values. The Orthodox Israel Coalition is slate number 4, which is sponsored by the OU and Yeshiva University and B'nai Akiva, Torah Mitzio, and Mizrahi. This represents the values and ideals of our community. And so, of course, the key is for you to register and vote. This is your chance to have your voice heard here sitting in the diaspora. And as a candidate, Stephen Flatow and others as candidates with the slate number 4, that's my recommendation. I would love if you'd be able to vote at that particular slate. So there's no connection really with that and this evening, but we're just trying to encourage people to vote. And it turns out that our guest is on the slate. All right, so who's the volunteer? Donnie and Yona, right? Okay, Donnie and Yona, the dream team, they're floating around, and if they bug you, be nice to them and register. Okay, so thank you so much to Joe Camelgard for serving as the sponsor for tonight's program, and thank you again all of you for being here. We have the privilege tonight to have with us an extraordinary person, man, Stephen Flatow. Stephen, in his own words, was, quote, just a real estate attorney in New Jersey until April 9th, 1995, when his daughter Elisa was a victim of a terrorist bus bombing in Gaza. And after he and his family suffered that terrible loss, Stephen worked with tremendous determination and courage to bring the murderers to justice through the American justice system. And it's an incredible story that took a long period of time with also a moderate and incredible degree of success as well. And so I'm so glad that all of you have come to hear his story, which is an amazing story and so much that we could learn from it. And he wrote a book about the battle, which I think the book is going to be available afterwards, and you could perhaps get Stephen's autograph. And the book is entitled A Father's Story, My Fight for Justice Against Iranian Terror. And I just want to mention that my wife and I had the privilege to get to know Elisa Flatow, Hashem Tom Dama. Elisa was studying in Nishmat, 1994-1995, the same year that my wife Jordana, actually we were engaged at the time and we were going to be married. And so Jordana was studying together with her at Nishmat. And my fiance at the time, and now wife Jordana, and I participated in a Purim Suda together with Elisa at the home of the Henkins. And so I didn't get a chance to know Elisa that well, but I remember her as such a sweet, kind, wonderful person. And a memory should always serve as a blessing and inspiration to all of us. The Flatows have dedicated the building of Nishmat in Elisa's memory. I believe there was Atmasa Sefer Torah as well, and dedicated in her honor and memory. And so she should continue to inspire you, Stephen, and give you strength to inspire us and fight for justice and fight for good causes. Thank you all for being here. Privileged to introduce to you Stephen Flatow.
I must be getting old because Rabbi Kopp stuck his arm to help me get up the steps here. Yeah. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, Joe Camelgard, for sponsoring tonight in memory of your father, Norman Camelgard. I had the privilege over a couple of years of seeing Joe and his father at our shul down in Long Branch. And Joe, the devotion that you showed your father, the care and the concern, it's just admirable. And if my kids give me 5% of what you gave your father, I'll be very happy. I recently spoke to high school students, and at the end, during the questions, somebody asked me, how did you get out of the speaking circuit? And I said, I think I was vaccinated with a phonograph needle. And when I said that, their faces all went blank, so the principal came out, and he explained to them what a phonograph was, and then he turned to me and he said, do not mention Hopewell and Cassidy. But it's good to be here with people who remember when the Dodgers came here from Brooklyn in 1958, 59. People who remember black and white TV, free channels, standing in line for polio vaccinations, all the good things that I did as a child. What I'd like to do tonight is tell you a little bit about Elisa's life and some of the things that we have learned since she was murdered almost 25 years ago. Maybe we'll have a better understanding of why we're all here. I believe that each of us has a purpose in life. Some call what happens to us destiny or karma or fate or beshert. As Jews, we believe that on Rosh Hashanah, the Almighty opens up this big book. And in it he starts to write the names of those who are going to be healthy, be happy, be wise, be financially successful, as well as those who are going to die. On Yom Kippur, we're told that the book is sealed. But I believe that there's something missing from that equation, and we like to say in American jargon that something is signed, sealed, and delivered. God has given us free will, and that's the delivery. We're the delivery agent for what's been signed and sealed. You want to be healthy, you've got to work out at the gym. You want to lose weight, you've got to cut back on what you eat. You want to go chapter 11, you have to make some real serious business mistakes. So I believe it was Elisa's destiny to miss one bus on a Sunday morning and catch another one. That was the bus that was going to be bombed in Gush Katif. But I have to be honest with you, Elisa did not get on that bus that Sunday morning in April 1995. She actually got on it in August of 1979 when she was 4.5 years old, getting ready to go to kindergarten. I was working in the city at the time, New York City that is, and my wife Roz called me at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She said, what time are you coming home? Your daughter is driving me crazy. Now we had 2 girls at the time, Elisa, who was 4.5, and Gail, who was 2.5, but I could tell from the emphasis that she meant Elisa. And I said, what's going on? And she said, when you come home, you'll sit down, you'll talk to her, you'll find out. Well, I did get home, we had dinner, we sat in our little den. I said, Elisa, what are you driving Mommy crazy about? And she looked at me and her mother with the big brown eyes, and she said, where am I going to kindergarten next month? Now, she was a bright girl. She knew I had taken a day off in June and brought her around the corner to the public school in West Orange, the Pleasantdale School. And she stood on one side of the counter and told the lady on the other her name, her date of birth, and her address, and her phone number, her mother's name, father's name. And I said, Elisa, you're going to the Pleasantdale School? Well, she looked at me, and she looked at her mother, she looked back at me, and she said, no, I'm not. I'm going to a Jewish school with my friend Becky, and Mommy has to call Becky's mommy tonight to find out about it, because I'm not going to the Pleasantdale School. And she walked out of the room. Now, yes, we were young parents, 1979, still very young, and we knew you didn't take marching orders from a 4.5-year-old girl. So Roz waited until the next day before she called Becky's mommy. And 2 days after that, the Flatows are taking a tour of an Orthodox yeshiva in West Caldwell, New Jersey, called the Hebrew Youth Academy. Now it's the Joseph Kushner Hebrew Academy. And as we're walking through the halls of the beautifully decorated school, because it was only 2 weeks before everything opened, and the teachers had been in and decorating and putting up posters and banners and things like that. And Rabbi Green, who was the principal, was extolling the virtues of a day school education, how in the morning we give the students their Hebrew subjects because they're alert and they're awake. After lunch, when the carbohydrates kick in from the sandwiches, then we give them the English subjects. And as we're going through the building and he's telling me all these things, I'm thinking to myself, you know, Saturday morning, you like to bond with your daughters. Well, it really wasn't called bonding in 1979. There was no such psychological term. It was called going to the hardware store. And in the afternoon, it was Mommy's turn to bond at the mall. So as we sat back in his office a few minutes later, he says, "Do you have any questions?" Now, the first question I asked him was, "How much is it going to cost?" Now, I have Elise's tuition contract for 1979, 1980, and it was between $1,750 and $2,000. And I showed that to my kids one day who were paying $15,000 and $18,000 a student. They go, "Wow, look at that." And I go, "Yeah, but in 1979, I was making $24,000 a year." So yeshiva education and tuitions is still the best form of birth control for Jewish parents today. Second question I asked him was, would sending Elise to this yeshiva change my lifestyle? Well, he looked at me right in the face, he leaned back in his big chair, then he leaned forward, he put his arms on the desk in front of me, and he said to me, "No." He lied. But not completely. See, I asked him the wrong question, folks. I said, sending it to this yeshiva, will that change my lifestyle? The yeshiva is a building, it's 4 walls, it's a ceiling, it's a floor, it's desks, things like that. But the education that Elisa began to bring home to us, bit by bit, made us realize one day that we couldn't send our daughter to school where she's learning about Kashrut and Shabbat and Yom Tov and Chagim and the state of Israel and this bracha and that bracha. We could no longer say on Saturday morning, let's go to the hardware store. So instead we started walking to shul on Shabbat, observing the holidays better than we ever did before. She was thriving. She came home one day in kindergarten excited, bubbling over. "Daddy, next week there's a party in the school. You have to come at night. It's Yom HaAtzmaut." I said, "What?" She said, "Yom HaAtzmaut. You gotta come next week." I said, okay. And that Friday afternoon, the Shabbat bulletin came home and it says, "Yom HaAtzmaut party, Israel's Independence Day." Flatow didn't know that. And we're gonna have Israeli food, and we're gonna see the projects. That Wednesday we arrived, and I learned that Israelis invented pizza. You know, when you're in kindergarten, you make a kotel out of sugar cubes. As you grow older, you make it out of plaster and paper mache. You know, your projects get bigger as you get older. Elisa was in love with the state of Israel because, much to my pleasant surprise, the state of Israel is a regular part of the yeshiva curriculum. When you walk through the halls of any modern Orthodox yeshiva today, you'll see pictures of Chayalim, pictures of the Kotel, you'll see representations of the Beit HaMikdash, you'll see scenes of the Jordan Valley, you'll see scenes of the Kinneret, Tel Aviv, every spot you can think of, Kever Rachel, you name it, it's there. And she had the opportunity to go to Israel when she was 11 with my sister. I like to think that my sister wanted someone to talk to for 2 weeks. And brought her to Kennedy Airport, and she went, she came back, and her first words to me at the airport when I picked her up were, not look at this great t-shirt I got you that says Coca-Cola in Hebrew. I mean, everyone has to get one of those, right? It was, when can I go back again? This picture, I hadn't been there yet, she's already been. She went again when she was 15 on ACHVA, National Council of Young Israel program in the summer, for 6 weeks of hiking and schlepping. The third trip that she took in her senior year of high school at the Frisch School in Paramus, New Jersey, was March of the Living. And when I travel around, there are people who have never heard of March of the Living. And I try to explain it to them this way. I say that you send away a teenage girl, and 2 weeks later, a proud young Jewish woman returns home. Because the first week she spends in Poland. She's on a bus in Warsaw, and the counselors point out writing that she can read on building lintels. Let's say the building might have been a yeshiva, or a hospital, a Jewish hospital. It's now an apartment building, or a police barracks, or worse. And because she's in Poland, she has to go to the camps. She goes to Treblinka, she goes to Medanik, and then Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, they take these kids to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And if you can imagine in your mind's eye, 2,000 kids from the diaspora standing there in blue jackets, many of them holding Israeli flags, at the gate that mocked everybody that says, "Work makes you free." And they're told to turn around and march 2 kilometers down the road through the gates of the extermination camp that was Birkenau. She doesn't. And she now knows what human ash looks like in an oven. And she's given a little roadside candle, and the kids are told to light it and say Kaddish. And they do. But unlike more than 1.5 million Jews who went through those same gates at Birkenau and Auschwitz, she's allowed to leave after the last Amen. She gets back on the bus. The bus eventually takes her to the airport, and they fly to Israel. They land in Israel at Ben Gurion Airport, and in those days, remember, you had to walk down the steps of the airplane to the bus. And she can feel the sun on her face early in the morning. And she looks up at the sky, and it's blue, it's cerulean blue, and there's not a cloud to be seen. And you can feel the warmth in the air as you stand there on the tarmac. Poland was cold, and it was damp, and it was yucky. Maybe deservedly so. And she begins her second week of her trip. One morning, the bus pulls over to the curb. She happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. Jaffa Road was still open to traffic in those days. And the councils tell all the kids to get off the bus, stand on the sidewalk. And they do. And they notice that a taxi cab just stopped. And the driver got out and standing by his door. And the passenger got out of the back seat and standing by his door. And people start coming out of the shops, the merchants, the customers. And passenger cars are stopping, and people are standing outside. And all of a sudden, the siren started to scream. It screamed for 2 minutes. If you look at your watch, you would see it was 11 a.m. Because that morning is Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Day of Remembrance for its fallen soldiers and victims of terror. And a whole country comes standing still in tribute to these people. That afternoon, she goes to Har Herzl, and she sees in the military cemetery people her father's age standing over tombstones that she could read in Hebrew. Boys who were 19 years old, 18 years old, 20 years old. That afternoon is spent in study and contemplation about the effects of war and the price that you pay for a country. As the sun sets, in our traditions, it's a new day. And suddenly there are fireworks over the old city. And kids are spraying themselves with that silly string confetti that comes out of cans. And they're dancing in the streets. Because that night begins Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Day of Independence. The one that Elisa taught us back in 1980. When she gets up in the morning and she comes out of her hotel, every car has a flag flying from it. Every balcony has a flag. People are wrapped in Israeli flags. And in contrast to the day before, the solemnity, today it's filled with soccer games, with picnics and barbecues in the parks. In a 2-day period, Israelis have their insides taken out and put back in again. Elisa returned after the second week in Israel, and she didn't say really much about the March of Living, that she was tired, and she had to rest, and she'll talk about it some other time. It was how she acted. She changed. In those days, we were, in West Orange, we were bringing in Soviet emigres as the Soviet Union collapsed. And they set up a school, not a yeshiva, but a school so that these Russian kids could get acclimated. Lisa came home one day, and she volunteered, she tells me, at the Russian school. I said, what are you going to do? Teach them English? You're going to work on their math skills? What is it? She says, no, they want to be Americans. I'll teach them how to play softball. And that's what she did. And I thought back to what the March of Living had meant to her, apparently. And I think what resonated with her is that in a 2-week period of time, she saw the most disgusting, despicable things that a supposedly cultured people do to another, and the good that a country can do for itself when it's given a little piece of land and the tools and the opportunity to make something out of that wilderness. That fall, when she went to Brandeis University, I get a phone call one day, and she says, Dad, guess what? I'm now the Shabbat meal coordinator in the dining room. I said, what does the Shabbat meal coordinator do? She says, well, Friday night we have about 250 kids, and I have to make sure everything is all set up. Shabbos morning we have about 200 kids, and I have to make sure everything's all set up again. And I'm thinking to myself, the girl I had to threaten to set a Shabbos table for 7 volunteers to take care of 250 kids. She was volunteering at a nursing home. She was tutoring kids after school. She wouldn't help her siblings with homework because they have to learn the way I learned on their own. Her final trip to Israel was her 6th. And it began in January 1995. So I told you about 3 trips. There were 2 more in the middle while she was in college. And then she takes her third trip, her final sixth trip. She was going to study at Nishmat, which the rabbi mentioned. It's a school, it's a women's midrashah, and it is at a very high level. Unlike many of Elisa's friends who did a gap year program, she didn't want to do that. She wanted to be able to study the subject she wanted to study, not worry about night seder and this and that, go here, go there. And she found an apartment off campus with some other girls from around the world. And she was able to sneak off to the kotel and watch the swearing-in ceremonies of the chayalim and see people just being themselves. And she was thriving. I got an email from her. In those days, emails from the colleges, she used her college email account, didn't have names, they had numbers. And very impersonal, and it said, "Hi Dad, is there money in my bank account? I want to go on vacation to Petra before Pesach." And she said, "I love America," because that was always my stuff to her, that she loved America. So I put money into her account, and I didn't think anything else about it until Saturday night, April the 8th. Sunday morning in Israel, Saturday night here. And Lisa calls to say, "I'm off on vacation." So I said, "How many days are you going to be in Petra?" And she said, "Oh, no, we decided that we can't go there because my friends didn't have the money." I didn't ask her for a refund or anything like that. I said, "So where are you going?" "I'm going to Gush Katif." Now, frankly, I didn't know where Gush Katif was. I had never heard of it before. And I said, "Elisa, where is Gush Katif?" And I know she wanted to go to the seashore, so I figured she was going to tell me it was near Tel Aviv, or Nahariya, or Kazari, or Herodian, all the way up, the coast. And she said Gaza. Now, maybe a normal parent would have taken the phone away from his mouth and screamed into it that you can't go because not only are the Jews not safe, but the Palestinians are starting to kill each other. But I didn't do that. You see, I had given Elisa 3 rules to travel by on all her Israel trips. First rule was that when you left Yerushalayim, I want you taking public transportation. I don't want you hitchhiking. I don't want you taking a cab or a ride with somebody you don't know. Second rule was I don't want you traveling by yourself. I want you to go with 1 or more friends. The more the merrier as far as I was concerned. And I want you to have a destination in mind. I don't want you to tell me you're going to camp out in Wadi Kelt someplace. So I said, "Elisa, how are you getting to Gush Katif?" And she said to me, "Well, it's 6 o'clock in the morning here," kind of like giving me the stuff, right? "And we're catching a bus from the central bus station in Jerusalem, and we're going to go down to Ashkelon and switch buses there and go to Gush Katif." I said, "Who are you traveling with?" She said, "I'm going with one of my roommates and another girl I haven't met yet." And I said, "What's so special? What's in Gush Katif that's so special?" And she explained to me that there's a hotel on the Mediterranean that has a mechitza on the beach, into the water, so men could be on one side and women could be on the other. She wanted to get a suntan before Pesach. So instead of screaming at her that she couldn't go, I said, "Look, have a good time. Call us when you get back to Jerusalem on Wednesday." And I hung up the phone. My wife, Rosa, was standing a few feet away on the other side of the kitchen, looked at me, and she said, "You forgot to get the name of the place where she's staying." And I said, "Don't worry, if something happens, we'll know about it." Next morning was typical Sunday in my house. I was late for shul. I jumped into a car on the driveway, it happened to be hers, and I started backing it out into the street, and I turned on the radio. I believe it was Winds 1010. Give us 10 minutes, we'll give you the world. And I heard of a bus bombing in the Gaza Strip. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I heard the sound of the explosion because I didn't. I'm not going to tell you that I heard the sound that metal makes when it's ripped off the frame of a bus by a bomb because I didn't. I'm not going to tell you I heard sounds of screaming people or the cries of pain because I didn't. But I knew at that split second that Elisa was involved and there was nothing I could do for her here. And I didn't want to go back into the house and tell my wife that Elisa was involved and wake up her and the kids, so I went to shul. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang, and I went to get it because I knew it was for me. And it was my wife on the phone telling me that she had just heard from the mother of one of her traveling companions that the bus had been bombed outside of Kfar Darom, and the girls were back in Jerusalem, but they didn't know what happened to Elisa at the scene. I took off my tallis and my tefillin, just left them on my chair, and I drove back home. My wife said to me, "What are we going to do? Who are you going to call?" And I realized that, in America, Israel, Sunday is like a day of rest. But in Israel, Sunday's like a Monday. Everyone's working. So I went to the phone book, try explaining that to teenagers, and I found the number for the Israeli consulate in Manhattan, and I dialed it, and sure enough, the line was busy. And I hung up and I redialed and I redialed, and I started getting nowhere. And I went back to the phone book and I found an order for the State Department in Washington, D.C. And I called there and the phone was answered before the second ring. And I explained to the operator why I was calling, and he said, hang on one second, sir. I will switch your call. And one ring later, a person picked up on the other end. And I told him what had happened, and he said, okay, I need your daughter's passport number, where she was living in Jerusalem, where she was going. Did she have any traveling companions with her? Basically, give her as much information as I possibly can. And he said, we'll call you back. Well, the consul, the American embassy in Tel Aviv found Elisa that morning in a hospital I never heard of before called Soroka Medical Center. But Soroka Medical Center sits in a city that we talk about over and over again in the early Moshiot of the Chumash. It's in Beersheba. And they put me in touch with a doctor at the hospital who told me that Elisa was in the intensive care unit. And I said, what should I do? And he said, you should come right away. I said, can you tell me more? And his English wasn't that good. A lot of, hemming and hawing. I said, can I speak to somebody else? And they put on a English speaker who said to me that yes, Elisa was here in the intensive care unit. She had been brought in the day before that morning by helicopter from Kfar Darom. We had operated on her, and she was now in the intensive care unit. I said, what's her condition? She said, well, she was injured in the head. And I said, what's her prognosis? He says, we suggest you should come right away. Now, you don't have to tell me the same thing twice to understand that I have to go. So that afternoon, my neighbor Paul Wolf and I, we got on an El Al flight, and we flew to Israel, to Tel Aviv. My rabbi had said to me, bring Tehillim with you, and say Tehillim on the plane, because, sometimes it reverses bad news. And I'll be honest with you, I sat on the top of it, was a 747, I sat on the upper level, and I'm trying to read these Tehillim, and all I felt was the words bouncing off the luggage compartment over me. So I put it away, put the Tehillim away, and I watched that screen in the back of the seat in front of me for 10 hours. The one that tells you the speed of the airplane, in miles per hour, kilometers per hour, the time you left, what time you're going to land, the temperature outside in case you want to go for a walk on the wing. We eventually landed in Tel Aviv. And I like to think that it was the same kind of morning that Elisa experienced when she went 3 years earlier. The sun was beautifully warm. I was the first one down. Friendly customs were waiting for me, and they couldn't look me in the eye. No stupid questions like, what brings you to Israel? And you have family here. Why are you here? Nothing like that morning. They took my passport, they stamped it, they handed it back to me, and they put me in a van. And we drove to Beersheba. Now, frankly, I had never been to Beersheba before, and we're driving through a desert. And I'm looking out my window on the left-hand side of the van, and I see camels on the side of the road, a few yards into the side of the road. Only place I'd seen camels like that was at the Bronx Zoo and at the Ringling Brothers Circus. And then to make things even more realistic, there was a Bedouin woman driving a donkey cart. In 1995, she's like Reagan's driving a donkey cart. But Beersheba is really an interesting city. We had to stop a traffic light at a makolet, and I looked at the sign, and there were 4 languages on it. Topmost language was Hebrew, second language was Arabic, third language was Russian. Anyone take a guess what the 4th language was? Amharic, the Ethiopians. Because I learned on that trip that Beersheba had a bad reputation of being a dumping ground from the Jewish Agency for new immigrants. We're going to put them in Beersheba. We're going to populate Beersheba. The city was catching up to them. Soroka Medical Center in those days was a rather small hospital, but a busy one. I mean, thousands of births each year. But, birth in an Israeli hospital is different than an American hospital. There you have a baby, you're out. There, the Arab Bedouins especially, they camp outside the hospital on the grounds. They're making coffee, they have a little tent, they're staying out of the shade, staying in the shade rather. It's a sight to see. Head of the hospital brought me in. He had to push me through a crowd of people who were waiting outside the doors of the intensive care unit because there were other injured in there. And as I'm going through, someone stuck a note in my hand. And the note said something along the lines of, do you need a car while you're here? Another note said, can we host you for Pesach? I went in to see Elisa. She was in a bed in this intensive care unit. Wasn't a mark on her, but for a bandage on the back of her head over here. And she had a ventilator tube in her mouth. I had to make sure it was her. When she was in kindergarten on Father's Day, she had her foot broken in an accident, bike accident. And what happened was one of the growth plates in one of her toes stopped growing. So as she got older, the toes got all misshapen and bent. When she was 16, they did a surgical procedure called a reverse syndactyly. They basically joined two toes together. And that's how I definitely knew it was her. Now, I grew up in the 1950s and 1960s. I remember all the great medical shows. It was Dr. Kildare, Medical Center, Medic, but maybe the best one of them all, the most dramatic one of all, the most serious one of all was Ben Casey. And what was Ben Casey? A neurosurgeon. And at least once a month on his episodes, there was a child lying in bed, head wrapped in bandages, and the father sitting next to the child, squeezing the kid's hand, and all of a sudden the child's eyes pop open, or she says something, or she squeezes the father's hand back. So you knew by the end of that episode, she was walking out of the hospital on her own 2 feet. When I sat by Elisa's bedside, I squeezed her hand and I whispered in her ear that, Elisa, everything will be okay, Daddy's here. But frankly, there was no squeeze back. There was no mumbling. Her eyes didn't open. Her hand fell limp by the side of the bed. Doctors took me into a small side room and they explained to me that Elisa had been operated on, but the damage to her brain was too severe. She's not breathing on her own, and she's now legally dead. And they let that wonderful piece of information sink in. And the head of the hospital looked at me and he said, "We have a question for you." And for the second time in 24 or so hours, I knew what was going on, and I looked at him and I said, "You want her organs, don't you?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Religious Jews do not donate organs out of misconception of halakha." And then touching his own chest, he says, "And we secular Jews, we choloni," he called himself, "we just don't do it. Will you help?" How can a Jew who believes in his faith say no in a situation like that? I spoke to Rabbi Moshe Tendler that morning up in Muncie, and he said, "You know, you have the opportunity to follow in the words of the Mishnah, which says that he who saves one life in Israel as if he has saved the entire world. You have the opportunity to save 6 worlds. You can do it." We went back to Elisa's bedside. I spoke to her mother. We agreed to do it. And we did. 3 transplants were successful, 3 were not. And then you try to bring your daughter home, bury her, you try to get on with your life after Shiva, which lasted all of a day and a half. It was Pesach, was that Friday night. And our neighbors were very good to us. They packed up everything for us on Thursday night, and we still haven't found the ice trays that they put away back in 1995. And then Friday night I stood up to make Kiddush at the table. We shrank the size of the Seder, but I tried to make Kiddush, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. But I tried, and I tried again and again and again. And my wife said, "Finally, look, sit down, we know what you're doing." I began thinking of how you pick yourself up. You know, when you lose a child, you want to hide under the covers. You don't want to get up. You want to black everything out. And you think by blocking something out, it's as if it never happened. And I tried to do that one morning before going to work. And I realized something. I realized that at that point in time, there had been over 18,000 casualties of Israel's wars and terror attacks. And it dawned on me that these victims had parents too. And their parents sat Shiva. And at the end of the Shiva, they got up and they got dressed and they went back to work and they tended house and they took care of the other kids. and still continue to build a country that we call Israel. So I started doing the same thing. I got up that morning, I went to work, cried a lot, I put one foot in front of the other. As the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, I began to ponder the question, when in situations like this, why do we respond this way? Why do we push forward? Why do we just not hide under a rock or lock ourselves away? And I realized that there's something bigger at stake here. That bigger stake, the thing that's really most important to us as Jews, is something that the rabbi mentioned earlier this morning, that this election for the World Zionist Organization. You know, we are not Israeli citizens, but we are part of the state of Israel as much as they are part of us here in America. And I believe with all my heart that if there was no state of Israel today, there'd be no American Jewish community left in this country. We have something to focus on. So I was lucky. I was invited to speak for Israel Bonds. I was invited to speak to the United Jewish Appeal, and I started traveling around the country. And I found that people were in agreement with me. Even when bad things happen, you still have to stand up for yourself. And still I questioned why I was doing this. I was traveling to Boston 3 or 4 times a month. I would make round trips to Chicago on Sundays to speak. I'd go to Florida to speak and come back the same day, just like I'm doing here in California. Why is it that Jews dig in together when the going gets tough? Why was it that the American Jews in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, they picketed the Soviet embassy, they protested Soviet Union's treatment of Jews. They convinced Congress to pass an act that would convince the Russians to let the Jews go. Why was it when Ethiopians had to be rescued, the Israelis said we need money? And we created in America Operation Moses. We brought out people who don't look like anything like us, but who are Jews. Because we don't look at color, we look at faith, we look at belief, we look at action. I know the Torah tells us, Tzedek Terdov, righteousness, thou shalt pursue, but, you know, frankly, my friends, the Torah tells us a lot of things. I needed something more concrete, more human, and one day I found it. You know, I think Parshas Lech Lecha is one of the most beautiful parshas in the entire Chumash. And we're reading about Abraham being told to get up and go to this land I'm going to show you. And all of a sudden we come across him splitting with his nephew Lot because they're fighting over the pasture lands, and Lot goes one way and Abraham's guys go the other. And then we read that there's a war going on by these tribes, and they capture Lot. Avram is sitting in his tent, and a man comes running up to him all out of breath, and he says, one of your kinsfolk has been taken captive. We read that Abraham gets up, he takes either one man, Eliezer, or 318 men, and he goes and defeats these warring tribes, and he rescues Lot. That's really not the moral of the story. The Flatow has an excellent comment on that. He looks at the use of the word kinsfolk, kinsman, in before and after, and he writes on that pasuk, he says, don't think he knew it was Lot. Flatow is telling us that Avram got up because it was simply a Jew in trouble. And that's what we do. Whether it's organ donation, whether it's giving money, whether it's supporting the IDF through fund drives here. A tragedy comes to Abraham with the death of Sarah. He mourns, and then he buys a burial place, and then he starts living his life again. Parents of terror victims do the same thing. We bury our daughters. We get on with life. We put one foot in front of the other. We try to build a better world. Unlike our enemies who are more interested in tearing down, we build up. And we can see that every day. The challenge for me was to let responsibility fall where it may. And in our case, we were told right away that the terror attack was committed by Islamic Jihad, and Islamic Jihad is a client of the Iranian Republic, the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I tried to find a way to turn that situation around. And in 1996, we found it. President Clinton had signed the bill called the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996 that did a few things. First of all, it imposed a death penalty on domestic American terrorism. Who was the first person executed under it? Timothy McVeigh. But it also gave parents like Steve Flatow the ability to sue a state sponsor of terrorism. In this case, Iran. You know, the State Department wasn't happy with Clinton. So when they worked on the language of the bill, they watered it down. My attorney, Steve Perlis, and I looked at it in summertime of 1996, and we realized a lot of work had to be done. We had to get the bill amended. So he and I spent weeks. I was going back and forth to Washington on the train. And the one place you don't want to be in the summer, believe me, is Washington, D.C. As soon as you get out of Union Station, the big train terminal, the humidity hits you in the face. By the time you leave at the end of the day, you're soaking through. Everything is just sticking to you. But we did it. We changed the law. And we brought a lawsuit. And we won. Today, our children face unprecedented attacks on college campuses, mainly for their support of Israel. Sometimes it's outright anti-Semitism. We're facing this increasingly loud chorus of BDS supporters, boycott, sanctions, and divestment, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And some, in response, some urge us to be quiet. It'll go away by itself. No, you can't be quiet. You have to be loud. You have to be right back in their face. You have to show the world that their agenda is not to get Israel to change some of its policies. Its agenda is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Standing up to that movement isn't optional. It's mandatory for all of us. It's nothing less than one of the key moral issues of our times, in my opinion. Even if support for Israel is not fashionable, we have to be unfashionable at times. It's true that, that Jews raised without a strong sense of tradition may not have the tools, but we can't give up on them. We have to bring them into the battle. We have to educate them. We have to give them the tools with which to proceed forward. Our lawsuit took a terrible turn one day when we identified Iranian assets that we wanted to seize in payment of our judgment. And my attorney, Tom Fay, went to the U.S. Marshal's office in Washington, D.C., and he gave me this writ of attachment. And the marshal looked at it, and he called his boss, who called his boss, who called his boss, who called his boss, who was the Attorney General of the United States. And their answer was, nope, you can't enforce that. Back into court we went. We had a hearing about our ability to attach assets. I was there with my two attorneys, and all of a sudden a bunch of lawyers walk in on the other side, and they sit at the other table, and we're making our arguments, and one of the attorneys stood up, and my attorney, Steve Perlis, said, Your Honor, I don't understand who these people are representing. And the judge looked at him and said, that's a good question, Mr. Perlis. Who are you here representing? He said, we're representing the United States of America. And the judge explained to him, well, the United States of America is not a party to this lawsuit. You must therefore be representing the Islamic Republic of Iran. And their faces blanched. But they got us. They had us postpone our attachments. We had to go back in and change legislation again and again and again, and we kept doing it. The fact of the matter is, it takes political willpower to get certain things done. There's an interesting story in the book about Hillary Clinton. We were struggling to find out how we could get compensated by the Iranians out of their Iranian assets. Now, if you remember, you may not, Hillary wanted to run for Senate in New York. She needed the Jewish votes. Well, while she was First Lady, she was in Ramallah, in Palestinian Authority territory, listening to Su'a Arafat speak. Now, Su'a Arafat was the wife of that Yasser Arafat. And she's going on and on in her fluent Arabic. And when it's all done, Hillary gets up and she takes both her hands and he kisses her on both cheeks. And I like to imagine that as Hillary was being walked back to her car by her escort, someone hit her in the back of the head and said, don't you realize what she was saying? And Hillary doesn't understand Arabic. Well, she got a quick lesson that what Suha was saying was that the Jews are poisoning our children, the Jews are giving us cancer, the Jews are poisoning our wells, the Jews are killing us unprovoked. And Hillary had a big problem on her hands because the American Orthodox community in New York picked up on that. Now, at the same time, we're trying to negotiate with Bill Clinton's people. So Hillary has a very good friend, Joe Lieberman, former senator now from Connecticut. And he said to Hillary, we got to make nice. Here's what you're going to do. I'm going to schedule a meeting for you with the Orthodox Union downtown Manhattan. And you're going to go down there and you're going to meet these people and you're going to make amends somehow. So I got a phone call from Andy Gantrow, who was then the president of the OU, and he said to me, I want you to ask a question. Keep it short, sweet, and to the point. So the question I asked Hillary at that meeting was, do you support the administration's efforts that are blocking terror victims from collecting from Iranian assets? And she said, no, I do not support it. Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather. But more importantly, within a month, the government had set up a negotiating committee to deal not only with Jewish victims of Iranian terror, but with prisoners of Hezbollah from Lebanon, as well as, believe it or not, Cubans who've been shot down, the Brothers of the Rescue. They had their gripes against the Cuban government. But now we're sitting down talking with people, and in charge of it was Jacob Lew, Orthodox Jew from New York City. He served as Secretary of Treasury under President Obama. And he was in charge of making amends between the two opposing sides. Not the Iranians and us, but us and the Clinton administration. And our attorneys were going at it tooth and nail. And I called him up one day and I said, Stu, I gotta be honest with you. Jack, I gotta be honest with you. I'm having nightmares about Stu Eisenstadt. Now, Stu Eisenstadt was the point man for Bill Clinton on this whole compensation issue. Brilliant man, brilliant lawyer. He had worked for Jimmy Carter. He knows his way around Capitol Hill. He knows his way throughout the administration, but he's making our life miserable. And he said to me, he chuckled and said, believe me, Stu's having nightmares about you. And within a couple of months, we hammered out a deal. The deal was that the victims of Iranian terror were going to split $400 million. That money was actually something I had identified 2 years earlier in the Foreign Military Sales Act account. $400 million, a lot of money. And we agreed that that money would then be used to reimburse the Treasury for the money that we got from the government. Only to find out 4 years ago that President Obama sent that money back to Iran on that midnight flight with about $1.8 billion more in money that had been seized and frozen in this country. The excuse was that, well, if we kept on to the money, we'd owe them more in interest. Our fear then, and I think it's come true, was that that money is being used to foment terror, not only in Israel, but in Lebanon with Hezbollah, in Yemen against Saudi Arabia. You name the place, the Iranians are putting proxies out there. And then we started moving on with our life, bit by bit. My children today are from Jews. My grandchildren don't know from anything else. You know, my kids grew up with me, right? My grandchildren think this is the way it's always supposed to be. They don't know that we went to Pizza Hut, you know, when the kids were 9 years old. You know, that's for sure. They shouldn't know that. So I think the difficulty that we have as people is how do we emulate our forefathers? And I'm not saying I've done a good job of it, but I've tried. And I think that the state of Israel needs us to be who we are, to show people that our faith is still alive after 4,000 years, and that we have to stick with them through the good times and bad. I began by talking about Bashir tonight. I mentioned Elisa's bicycle accident. On that morning when I was driving her to the hospital, because I could see the foot was badly broken, she was sitting in the back seat, laying down in the back seat of the Buick. And we came to a traffic light, and I hear her moaning and groaning in the back, and she's 5.5 years old. You know how these kids can moan and groan, right? So I angled the mirror and I looked at her and I said, Elisa, what's wrong? And I frankly I expected her to say, my foot is killing me. Her phrase was gushing. There was no blood, but it was gushing. So I looked at her in the mirror and I said, Elisa, come on, it was an accident. You didn't expect Marcy to ride over your foot with a bike. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Today, my friends, sometimes when I sit on an airplane traveling to places like Los Angeles, I hear Elisa's voice in the back of my head saying, "Daddy, why did this happen to me?" And you know, my friends, I always start out the same way. Elisa, we don't understand why things happen. We don't understand why we sent you to yeshiva and your sisters and brother to follow you. We don't understand why we encouraged you in your love of Israel by letting you travel there over and over and over again. We don't know a lot of things, but this time I understand one thing, Elisa. Because you were in the land you loved, with the people you loved, studying the Torah you loved, this time you were in the right place. And I hope to find my right place one day. Thank you.
Beautiful moving presentation. Steve is gracious enough to take some questions from the crowd on any subject you'd like, he said. Relating somewhat to his presentation.
In other words, politics is off the table. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you. How is the situation right now?
I can't understand you.
No, I'm sorry. How is the situation right now? I mean, with the lawsuits against the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, were you able to, the organization is able to get any money, anything?
Well, we did receive what they call the compensatory damages, roughly 10% of our judgment. We're trying to pursue Iran in Europe, but Iran has too many friends in the European capitals. The Germans and the French and the Italians work mightily to evade American sanctions imposed on Iran. The governments get involved there, as they did here in our case in America, and it's just a slugfest. So I doubt anything will ever happen in my lifetime. The point, though, is to keep the pressure on them, let them know that people are chasing them, and maybe one day they'll crumble. Yes?
Do you help with Shurat Hadid?
No, they're doing something totally different. They're dealing with Palestinians, and I really don't understand how they operate. I don't have any familiarity with how they do it. I think about a day-to-day basis. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to thank you for sharing your story with us, and your words touch my heart.
Thank you.
Because I have the very same experience. When my telephone at work rang, and my sister was on the phone to let me know that she was on the bus number 2 that was coming back from Kotel. She and her 5 children were injured. Baruch Hashem, they survived. It was August 11, 2003. 16 and a half years later, my niece Shira is still going under treatment for the blind eye that she has. Just wanted to let you know that we also followed and tried to bring a lawsuit against Iran. We have a judgment, but we still cannot do anything about it. Again, thank you very much for sharing your story. It really touched my heart.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you again for having me. I know this is called the Modern Minds thing. I don't know if I'm modern or I have a mind left anymore. I did like that. I did like that headline. Thank you.
Thank you all again for being here. Thank you, Mr. Flatow, for the wonderful, extraordinary presentation. If anyone would like to come over and purchase a book and to have Mr. Flatow sign the book, you're welcome to come over here. Also say hello. Again, the Mizrahi